Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my Worlds Qualifying Series overview and analysis video. This is kind of untechnically our first coverage game of Worlds this year. I'm so pumped up for it. Worlds has come at just the right time. Maybe it could have been a little bit earlier. I think a lot of people have been really excited for it this year. There've been some interesting storylines, I should say, going into this year's World Championships. Of course, we had that massive break, and these are really the first games that we've seen in quite a while from any of these teams, and so I'm very excited to cover them today. Of course, I guess it's not officially a World Series. It's a series to determine who ends up being the final team that qualifies for Worlds, but it's in Korea. It's in the World Stadium. You might as well consider this a play-ins matchup, which is what I'm going to do, but if you guys are as excited as I am for this series, let me know down in the comments section below. Who did you think was going to win, BDS or Golden Guardians? It's obviously a very interesting discussion to have. If you want to know my thoughts on everything about Worlds 2023 before the tournament starts, you can check out the bevy of videos that we have put out on this channel before the tournament ends up beginning. We've got a meta report video that kind of goes over some of the picks you might be able to expect at this tournament. We have a video of the top 20 players, I believe, at the World Championships this year. It's more like top 27 with some honorable mentions. And then, of course, the big one, my big primer video where we go in depth on all 23 teams, including the two that are going to be playing here today. I did kind of talk about which one I expected to be able to take this series in that video, but if you want an in-depth description on how these two teams play the game or how every team at the World Championship wants to play the game, that video is definitely a good one to watch. They're obviously going to be linked in the iCard, but today it's time to jump into our Worlds Qualifying Series analysis. Of course, this is a matchup between the number 4 seed from North America in Golden Guardians and the number 4 seed from the LEC in Team BDS. A very intriguing matchup on paper because I think both of these teams have taken pretty similar routes to get to the place that they are at now. Both of them, I think, looked fantastic just a couple of months ago, especially right before MSI. You had a team like Golden Guardians that very shockingly was able to make the LCS finals. They go on to be the number 2 seed from North America at MSI, and they do incredibly well, much better than people give them credit for or people expected from them in the first place. Not only were they easily the best team in the play-ins, that wasn't, Billy and G2, which just is a pretty unfair comparison, but they were even able to take a game off of Billy. They looked competitive in a couple of games against Gen.G Gaming. There were good moments from Golden Guardians. A couple of their players overperformed. They just weren't in form at all at the end of the summer split. There really is no other way to say it. They got destroyed by Energy in the upper bracket, and then they go on to lose to Team Liquid to get this 4th place seed. This seems like a team that was destined to be a top 2 seed coming out of the LCS at, even at the end of the regular season in the summer split. And so to see them here, you're excited if you're a North America fan because you believe they have the talent to potentially outperform this ranking, but man, they have not been playing good League of Legends as of late, and so they're going to have to get better at that. And then for BDS, very similar story, if we're being entirely honest. By the end of Spring Split, right before MSI, this was arguably a top 2, top 3 team in Europe with how they were playing. They made finals. They went up 2-0 against Mad Lions in those finals, of course. Giving over the reverse sweep was not a part of their plan, but it's okay. They end up not going to MSI because of the way the LEC structure ends up working, but summer, again, was kind of a down split for them. They ended up not really being all that good. They didn't even make top 4. They didn't make the playoffs. They looked okay in the season finals bracket. They were able to get past the opponents that they needed to in order to get into this part of the tournament. They played SK Gaming, or they beat SK Gaming, I should say, which is obviously not a huge win, but it's a good win nonetheless. But very similar to what I said about Golden Guardians, they simply have to be better than what they have been in recent months in order for me to believe that they are going to be a true difference maker here. Both of these teams have a really good amount of talent on their teams. When you look at players like Licorice and Stixay and Huhi that I really believe have been exceptional players at that level all year long. You can say the same thing about BDS, Adam, Crowny, Sheo. These have all been top of their position players for most of this year. If you're going to get the good version of one and the bad version of the other, I imagine the series isn't going to be relatively close, but hopefully we can get the good versions of both of these teams because I do think that there are really good versions of both of these teams. I predicted Golden Guardians in my video. I think they're just slightly more talented on paper, but again, if Adam really has a great series, if Crowny can really bounce back, BDS should be able to win. But if Licorice performs like he did internationally earlier this year, if Stixay and Huhi can be the better bot lane, I would imagine Golden Guardians would be favorites. And so Like I said in that primer video, it's very up and down. I put them back to back for a reason in the same tier, one after the other, and I really don't think there's any massive difference between these two, but let's see and let's find out if that ended up being the case or if one of these teams was just going to roll over the other. Of course, if you're new here, we're going to go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game at the end of each series. Or I guess I should say at the end of the one series that we're going to cover today, I will be giving a player of the series as well to kind of tie everything in a nice little bow. We'll throw up the play-ins graphic at the end of this video so we can kind of preview where that might be going. And, you know, we'll be on our merry way with Worlds officially kicking off. But let's go ahead and jump into this series to see who makes it there, starting with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Team BDS. They are going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0, and you know what? This was not a close game. This was not one of those back and forth occasions that I was kind of hoping that we would see in this series at the very least. Kicking it off, it's an absolute stomp coming in from BDS, and yes, this is what I wanted to see. We'll talk about Golden Guardians, because that's really going to be the thing that everyone talks about here, and I'll talk about why there's good and bad in that kind of ideology, and just in general of why I think that's both fair and not fair towards some of the plays that this team made. But let's give some credit where credit is due. BDS played awesome in this game. They took advantage of a ton of mistakes that Golden Guardians was able to make. I think their draft is super consistent, especially considering what they are going into, and I think they really put themselves in a much better position than they were doing in the LEC this split. It's not necessarily just the game plan that was really the problem. They were misplaying a lot of these easy plays, especially in 1v1 lanes, but this felt like spring BDS, and I think that that's really encouraging to a lot of different people. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game for me, at least in game number 1, kind of obviously to me, but I think some people are going to dispute it. For me, it's going to go to Adam in the top lane. So happy to see Adam continue to play at a high level. We know he's a very good top laner. I've raved about Adam all year long on this channel. In fact, I've honestly at times felt like I've been overly positive about him in the words that I've used and in the way that I've hyped him up, but to me, he was the best top laner in the LEC in 2023. That does include Broken Blade. I would argue Broken Blade was better in the more important matches, like the playoffs, and I would still, you know, take Broken Blade as a player, but in terms of production, especially in the regular season, I don't think anybody has been able to touch what Adam has been doing. For BDS, he's been able to create a lot of avenues and a lot of lanes for his team to win, more so than basically any other top laner. In fact, I compare him quite a bit to what Licorice has been able to do for Golden Guardians. I think in very different ways. They're different styles for sure, but Adam's awesome. Like, I'm not surprised to see him show up to the series and utterly dominate game number 1. You get to play the Renekton into the Cassante. We talked about how this matchup is basically untouched from what it has been over the past few months, and Renekton is still very strong in that particular matchup. We've seen him get a few nerfs towards his magic resistance, but it's really not going to matter all that much in this particular lane. If you're able to establish that pressure early, you're going to be able to do a lot with it, and Adam was dominant in the 1v1. Really impressive stuff. This was a Chatham performance, and again, if he's going to play like that the whole series, it's doomed for Golden Guardians, because when Adam plays well for BDS, they win. It really does feel like it's that simple. But the rest of the team, I think, also stepped up. I've consistently doubted and underestimated what Nuke has been offering this BDS team. He's the one player that has probably been my biggest blind spot over the course of this year, because even when they were winning in spring, it really felt like he was kind of along for the ride more than he was somebody that was pulling the cart forward. It really felt like Adam and Crowny and Sheo and Lebrov that were all having career splits, but, you know, I was still concerned and a little bit, you know, up and down on what Nuke was offering individually as a player, but this was a spectacular performance. Now, it does have a little bit more of an asterisk than what Adam had, in my opinion, because I do think his lane opponent was awful in this game, which we will talk about, but Nuke did a great job of taking advantage of the mistakes that both Gory and River were having. Orianna is one of those picks that I regret not putting in my meta video, as I've said in some of the comments to that video. And it's mostly because of just how consistent she is. She's going to do a lot of damage. She's going to be very useful. Even if she's not super far ahead, she's going to get picked a lot because she's just very good in a lot of different circumstances. And so, you know, Nuke playing her at a high level, it's certainly a good thing to see. Sheo was solid in this game on the Maokai. Like the pick, Maokai's still really strong. It's very interesting to see a lot of people start moving away from that style because I do think it's still the strongest in the game. And you have the Sivir Rakan on the bot side just in case things go like super duper late game. You can pair that up with the Maokai and the Orianna and potentially have this Sivir that hits 3 items and you can still carry the game. But for the most part, when you look at BDS's draft, you have 3 winning lanes and you're just going to play through them. Sivir is pretty good into Kai'Sa early. Even if she's not going to be able to dominate, she's certainly not going to allow Kai'Sa to scale for free. You're going to be able to win that lane, and I think Lebrov played really aggro as well. And so it really was the solo laners for BDS that I think kind of pushed them ahead, but everybody on the team really held up their end of the bargain, and then for Golden Guardians, this was a disaster. I mean, what do you even want me to say about this? A couple of these players played just about as bad as we have seen them, and, you know, that's including the playoff run where I talked about them just getting outclassed by players that I considered, quite frankly, inferior to the talent that they have. It was so much worse in this series against a BDS team that was on their A game. Dud of the game obviously has to go to Gory. I don't know how you could possibly give it to anyone else. We talked about Gory's playoff struggles a bit in the primer video where it was like, oh my god, he has just like completely forgotten how to play. Both him and River were awful in the playoffs in the LCS for Golden Guardians, and it feels like that form has been taken and ramped up to 10 in this first game. Gory played Yone, and it was a disaster. Consistently out of position, consistently, you know, in a place where Nuke can just auto-attack him to death as Orianna, and it's like, what are you doing, man? Like, are you awake? Like, I don't know what to say to him. Like, this was a bottom 1 performance in terms of what you could expect to get out of Gory. This was like a 0th percentile performance from what he has given over the course of this year. He's been really good for Golden Guardians and certainly a step up from what we expected him to be when he came over to the LCS, but his recent form is concerning, especially if this is the outcome of it. And then River was obviously bad as well. Everybody has been talking about Talia, and they're hyping up Talia as this flex pick, and it gets picked on blue side, you know, first here, and I'm just like, I don't get it. I really don't understand the priority on Talia. I can get why she's valuable. Like, I get why you would want to pick her. But as, like, the #1 jungler over Maokai, especially with it still up on the board, I don't get it, like, at all, if I'm being honest. I think the priority on it was a big problem for Golden Guardians. They didn't have any stability once Talia lost early, which is super expected into the Maokai. All of a sudden, you're just nowhere, right? Like, she's never going to be in a position where she can deal damage, especially if you have 3 losing lanes. And so, I really don't get the draft from Golden Guardians. That was a big problem of theirs in the playoffs as well, was that their drafts were just horrendous. And I think that's another thing that carried in here. And River played the Talia really poorly. That jungle mid duo is a problem if they're going to play like this. This was a problematic game. Licorice got destroyed in the top lane. I'm very high on Licorice, especially considering the body of work that he's put together over the course of 2023, but he's certainly not a perfect player, and you have to remember, he's kind of rebounded and rebuilt the idea of him over the course of this year, because he wasn't very good last year, and he really wasn't all that good at the beginning of the spring split. It really was MSI that completely rearranged a lot of people's thinking, and then his great summer split, but you know, confidence is a big thing for him, and if he gets slaughtered, quite frankly, like he did in this game #1 for more games in this series, that could continue to be a problem. I thought Stixxay and Huhi were fine, I guess. They played Kai'Sa Amumu, which is a regular bot lane in the LCS. I know it's not really a ton elsewhere, but it's pretty normal for these two to pull that out, and it was fine, I guess, but solo lanes lost way too hard, and the Talia was completely useless. There's just no way to win this game after the early game. And so for Golden Guardians, a disaster. I mean, this is about as bad as it gets in game #1. A 20-minute destruction for them is not really what you had on the cards. And then for BDS, this is exactly what you were looking for. Confidence is firmly planted in your direction, but again, it's only game 1. If BDS does this again, that's when you're really like, oh my god, this series is not in a good state for Golden Guardians. But you know, you can lose game 1, you can even get destroyed in game 1. It doesn't count for more. If you win game 2, series is all tied up. Anything can go anywhere. So a big game 2 for both of these teams. Can Golden Guardians bounce back, or is BDS going to take a full lead of this series? Well, the winner of game #2 was BDS. They are going to take game #2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and they are clearly the better team through the first 2 games at the very least. I'm not going to completely rule out a reverse sweep as a potential option, but man, watching those first 2 games, it is just not close. Every lead that Golden Guardians is able to generate for themselves, they basically immediately give away with some awful play. In the first game, it was from the solo laners in the top side of the map. In the second game, it's from the bot lane and the bot side of this map. It just seems like the consistency for this team is nowhere to be found. But credit to BDS where credit is due. They are capitalizing on these mistakes. We can sit here and talk about how Golden Guardians is really putting themselves in a bad position. And I'm not going to argue that. Golden Guardians is absolutely putting themselves in a bad position, but BDS still has to be the kind of team that can capitalize on it. The early game didn't necessarily go their way. There were a couple of bold moves made by Golden Guardians that did give them, at the very least, some of an advantage that they couldn't end up keeping, but you know, BDS had to fight their way back in this game, and they did so without really any sort of fault, like with relative ease, if we're being entirely honest. So credit to them. Player of the game was kind of difficult because this really was more of a team win, I think, than game #1 was, where you had Adam and you had Nuke just kind of dominating. Now, The Garen is definitely kind of the spotlight of this game still because it's Garen being picked in a Worlds qualifying series. That's awesome, and everybody's really excited about that, but if you're a North America fan, you've been seeing Garen all year long in the NACL, and so it's nothing new to you here, but, of course, Adam has pulled it out quite a bit in the LEC as well, at least a little bit, but player of the game for me is actually going to go to Labrov in the support position on the Rakan. I felt he was the most consistent player across this entire game. He maybe didn't have the same kind of flashy moments that Adam did on the Garen in the top lane, with Kalista just walking straight into him, which obviously we'll talk about, but I felt like the Rakan was probably the most consistent champion in terms of what he was able to create in this game. And Labrov in general, I think, is kind of an unsung hero for BDS, or at least he was when this team was really playing well, like 4 months ago. Crowny and Adam were getting a lot of the press, rightfully so, because I do think that they were generating a ton of leads individually on their own. And, I think Sheo and Nuke had really developed a nice chemistry together, but Labrov was awesome in team fights. And really, I think that's a big difference maker as a support. There really aren't a lot of supports that are super teamfight oriented nowadays. I think the LEC specializes in that a bit more than a lot of the other regions. We're talking about quite a few players in the LEC as very teamfight oriented supports. Trimby definitely comes to mind as another, but it's not a style that you see a ton in the LPL and in the LCK, and even in the LCS. You see a lot more roamers. You see a lot more players that want to get out on the move and play really active. Labrov is definitely a little bit more traditional in the sense of how he wants to play, but he's still super effective on champions like Rakan. We can talk about how the Kalista Neeko did not work out once we get to the Golden Guardian section, but a lot of that was the Rakan basically stopping everything that they wanted to do. Credit to Adam, though. Like I said, he made a lot of the flashy plays in this game. Pulling out Garen in Game 2 of a Worlds qualifying series is super awesome. It's great for the game, and it's super fun to watch. He kind of dominated lane once again. Licorice, I think, was a little bit better in this game. He at least had a couple of moments where he looked like he was surviving, especially in the isolated 1v1 or when, Sheo would offer some assistance in the top lane. Licorice was actually doing a pretty decent job of being able to establish a lead early. Same thing for River, but great job by Adam to stay in the game, keep his head on straight, I guess, if you will, and not really freak out that he was losing gold. And then just kind of allow his Ezreal and his Azir to get to the part of the game where they were just going to be stronger in a lot of these fights. And so, really good stuff from them. Sheo was solid on the Maokai. Basically, everybody playing well for BDS even after the rough early game. And then for Golden Guardians, it's just frustrating, right? Like, I think this draft is better because I think you have more options. I think the Talia in the mid lane gives you significantly more pressure, and I actually do think that the mid lane is pretty strong here for Golden Guardians. You're expecting to be able to play around Talia relatively well with the Bel'Veth in the jungle, which, again, I've talked about Bel'Veth. I'm not a huge fan of the pick, but it can do things. It's definitely a little bit more active, and I think it works here. Your only concern is that you are relying on that early game to be able to generate those leads, especially towards the bot side of the map with that Kalista Neeko duo. You're really relying on them being able to establish that pressure early, and unfortunately, for Golden Guardians, Stixxay and Huhi just played really bad in this game. Dead of the game is going to go to Huhi for me. Didn't like how he played at all, and I think everybody is going to agree with that. It really felt like he was completely irrelevant towards the outcome of this game for Golden Guardians, and actually, that's probably doing him justice. He wasn't irrelevant because he was a negative for this team. He was consistently going in with ultimates that were hitting no one and consistently trying to step up, be far forward on a champion that has one of the lowest base health and armor scalings in the entire game. It's just not good. Like, he was not very good in this game. He was playing Neeko like it's a muumuu, and you can't get away with that. You're just not going to be able to get away with that against a team like BDS. Stixxay obviously had his own problems playing a champion like Kalista, not really doing as much as he needed to do early, and then late game, actively walking into melee champions and just dying. It just feels like this team is incredibly tilted, incredibly mental boomed at this point, and it's crazy because this is game 2 of their trip out to Korea. I mean, there have been reports that they've been getting absolutely slammed in scrims, and, maybe that has to do with confidence, because that's kind of always been the thing with Golden Guardians, is as soon as they got their confidence back, players like Licorice and Stixxay that hadn't been good in recent years, they felt confident again, and they were playing like all pros again. If that confidence got shattered in some of these scrims, I could see this kind of being the result, if I'm being honest. But the bot lane was devastatingly bad. Licorice was fine in lane, probably the best performing member. Him and River, I think, at least tried this game. Gory continues to struggle in the mid lane matchup. I think Nuke does a very good job of just neutralizing lane and getting himself into the mid to late game to be useful. Kind of Larson-esque in that regard, with Larson not being at Worlds. I think Nuke kind of fills a similar role for this team, and I think that's a good thing overall. I think Nuke has been positive, but the Golden Guardians just feels completely outclassed. It feels like I said earlier, their mental is just completely boomed, and I don't really know how they're going to be able to get back into a series like this, but they're going to have to. They're down 2-0. Again, reverse sweep isn't impossible, But with how this team has been playing and how they've been throwing away good opportunities and just generally making a ridiculous amount of mistakes, I don't have a ton of confidence that they're going to be able to come back. And then for BDS, this is basically everything you could have asked for with this team coming to Korea. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of BDS in the regular season, but if they're going to play like this is a dangerous team. But are they going to be able to close it out in a clean sweep? Or is Golden Guardians going to at the very least be able to take one game? Well, the winner of game number 3 was BDS. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to close out this series with a clean 3-0 sweep, and they have officially now qualified as the final team in the 2023 World Championships. Congratulations to BDS. They earned it. They played phenomenal in this series. In all 3 games, they were the better team by a clear margin. Game 1 was a stomp. Game 2, they did a great job rallying an early storm and, you know, really coming back and showing that they definitely deserved to be the winners in that second game. And then game 3 was just as good, arguably, as game number 1, just in a slightly different way against a slightly better draft. And so I feel pretty good about BDS heading into the play-in stage. As for Golden Guardians, you know, it's gonna be an interesting conversation to have, because I'm going to be positive about them on this channel, because that's kind of what I do. I really try not to be super negative about a lot of these teams, especially when it really doesn't feel like I need to be. And honestly, it doesn't feel like I need to be about Golden Guardians. Did they play awful today? Yes. But was this season a huge overachievement for them? Still, yes. And so we'll talk about that when we get to them. But let's start off with BDS and what they were able to do in this third game. Player of the game for me and player of the series as a whole is going to go to Adam in the top lane. I just don't see how you could give this to anybody else, if I'm being entirely honest. He ran this series, whether it was game 1 on the Renekton, where he was phenomenal, absolutely destroying Licorice, or both games 2 and 3 on the Garen, pulling a pick out that a lot of people were really excited to see that, you know, we really haven't heard a lot of talk about. We've seen Adam pull it out. We've seen some other players pull it out over the course of this year, but really proving the power of Garen, especially into some of the more meta top laners at the current moment. Things like Cassante, things like Jax, as we've seen in this game. Adam was spectacular. He had, once again, just absolutely destroyed lane. And I hope this is kind of an awakening for a lot of people. I think that Adam is one of those players that still kind of gets disrespected because of his quote-unquote flip-floppy playstyle. Like, I understand that, you know, obviously the time on Fnatic wasn't exactly, you know, the best. It didn't leave the best taste in everyone's mouths, and he wasn't very good last year on BDS. He was the worst version of that flip-floppy Adam that we had come to know, but he goes back down to BDS Academy in the ERLs, and he absolutely destroys that. Is easily the best top laner in the ERLs. Like I said in the preseason, I expected high things from him coming into the year, and he has even surpassed that. Mechanically speaking, he is clear-cut the most talented top laner in the West, and I really don't even think it's particularly close. His good games are better than anybody else's good games in the West. It really is like that, whether that's North America or Europe, right? I think Adam is better than basically everybody else. Broken Blade's probably the only top laner at the moment that I feel is you know, comparable. I would have said Licorice before this series, but he was miserable, which we will get to. But Adam is the real deal. He's been having a very consistent year all around, and another great series from him. For him to be kind of the guy that gets them in here is really impressive. But to say that it was a one-man show isn't particularly fair to the rest of this team. Like I've talked about, in all 3 of these games up until this point, everybody on BDS is winning here. This is a very stable draft. One thing I was concerned about going into this game for them is the lack of concrete damage, especially going into something like Azir, Xayah plus Ivern, right? There's a lot of damage and quite a bit of lockdown and support coming in from the other side. You're really relying on the Ezreal to be a primary damage dealer or for the Garen to get fed. Luckily, it was kind of both this game. Crownie continued to be really solid. I don't think he was necessarily exceptional in this series because I don't think he had to be. He certainly didn't do anything wrong. He didn't make any mistakes, but he wasn't really called upon to be the main guy, which is really good for BDS. Because a lot of times during the spring split, they were calling on him to be the main guy, and when he wouldn't win, it would be a little bit more difficult for this team to do well. So it's nice to see them win, not in spite of Crownie, because, again, he certainly played fine, but just without, you know, him being the primary dominator. And then Lebrov was great. I thought this entire series, some great support play from him. Shea was really solid, never really lost his confidence, even when he was down in game number 2. Was looking really good the whole series. Nuke was super solid, and he has been super solid for a long time. I'm going to have to start buying in on the Nuke stock. There really is no other way for me to do this. He's just been very, very good for way too long now for me to ignore it any longer. everybody on BDS really held up their own end of the bargain, and now they're in the play-in stage, and that's a pretty good place for them to be, because I think there's a really strong argument that they are the best team in the play-in stage. We'll talk about that a bit more at the end of the video, but phenomenal series, phenomenal demolition coming in from BDS. You just have to be proud of that team. And then for Golden Guardians, their year ends here. They fly out to Korea to play 3 games and get absolutely destroyed in all 3. Certainly not the expectation, I think, for what this team wanted going into a series like this. But like I said earlier, it's hard to look at this year as anything other than productive. Like, yes, this series was a disaster. Licorice completely folded. He had been their second best player, in my opinion, over the course of this year, only behind Huhi, who was also really bad in this series. And it's definitely frustrating when you look at the growth and the development that Golden Guardians made, especially towards the beginning of summer, and how they were really looking like one of the top 2 at worst teams going into playoffs. And, they had kind of dominated all of the regular season. They had looked good at MSI. For them to come in as the 4 seed in general was already kind of a disappointment from the regular season, but for them to get, bodied here, it certainly isn't a great taste. But again, if you would have told me that this roster, this group of 5 players at the beginning of the year would go as the number 4 seed to Worlds, and even if they got destroyed, they would be in that Worlds qualifying series, I would say that's a massive success. Not only for these players, but for this organization that has really never found any sort of consistent success. This is easily the best year of this org's existence, and I think this, this is a good moving forward point. This is a good place to plant their flag and say, like, hey, we were a Worlds team this year. We went to MSI. We played multiple international best of 5s this year. And that's really impressive for Golden Guardians to do for the first time in their org's history. Licorice, Stixay, Huhi, nice bounce back years. River and Gory proving they were good imports now. A lot fell off the wheels at the end of the year, and that's certainly going to be a concern for this team going into the offseason. I'm not exactly sure what kind of decisions they might want to make based off of that, because players like Gory were awful this series. Like, Gory was the worst mid laner. This is the worst series a mid laner has had in a very long time in a best of 5. River went 0-0-0 on Ivern and was really awful in game 1 on the Taliyah. Licorice got completely outplayed by Adam. Stixay and Huhi basically threw the game away 2v2 in game number 2. Just a lot of compounding factors that are certainly going to be worth bringing up questions for, but these players were good domestically, and it very well could have just been not their day. Again, a lot of these players really rely a lot on confidence, and I think their confidence was busted very early on in this series, if not even before the series ever started from scrim results, quote-unquote leaking. So, not a great end to the year for Golden Guardians, but you still have to celebrate what this org and what these players were able to do. But for BDS, for this org that, bought into the LEC only 1 year ago, remember, at the end of last year, the end of their first year, people were calling for them to have to sell their spot, because it's like, oh, this org's not trying, they're not putting in any sort of effort, they don't deserve to be in the LEC. Well, shout out LEC fans, you guys are the best. You're super active in the comments, and I appreciate you, but you guys are also very, very reactionary, and this is why you shouldn't be reactionary. This is an example of an org that said, we took 1 year to try stuff out to see if we could make a team that could work, and it didn't. We went back to the drawing board, promoted some people internally, got together a roster of players we believed in, even if the public didn't believe in them nearly as much, and here we are now, officially making it into the play-in stage at the World Championships. I'm proud of this org, I'm proud of these players, basically every single one of them taking major steps up this year, and really, this is just the start for them. They really should be a team that starts making it through play-ins, and should be playing some interesting games against the best teams in the world. Alright, but that is going to do it for my Worlds Qualifying Series 2023 overview and analysis. Up on the screen now, it is officially your Worlds 2023 play-in stage bracket. You've got 4 teams on each side of the bracket, BDS officially being that 8th team to slot into the play-in stage. We'll quickly go over maybe some of my expectations. I'm not going to do a full bracket prediction or anything like that, because if you want to know my thoughts on all of these teams super in-depth, again, I highly recommend you go and check out the Worlds Primer video that we did. It's 3 hours, almost 3 hours of coverage talking about every single team, not only in the play-in stage, but at the tournament as a whole. And so if you're interested, please go ahead and check that out. But quickly going over my thoughts on it, talked about this a bit in the comment section of that video. The A side of this bracket, the left side, as you can see it on the screen, of this bracket is so stacked. These are 4 of the best teams in the play-in stage. I think the 3 weakest teams in the play-in stage are all on the B side of the bracket, being Team Wales, DFM, and CFO. I think that they are the 3 weakest teams. That's good news for BDS, who we just saw destroy Golden Guardians. This should be a pretty easy side of the bracket to get out as number 1 on, but again, you don't only need to beat your side of the bracket. How this works is that the top 2 seeds from each side will then qualify for a best of 5 that they play against the other side in. It's the 1 seed from one side versus the 2 seed from the other side. I would expect the 1 seeds from each respective side to be PSG Talon and Team BDS. I think that they are clearly the best teams on their side of the bracket, although for PSG, it's going to be an interesting conversation. I think the number 2 seed in that side is super up for debate. I think the winner of Loud and Gam is certainly going to give us some really interesting thoughts, and that's probably going to be your de facto winner, but they're probably going to play twice on that side of the bracket to determine that number 2 seed. So whoever ends up getting the better of that matchup, I think will probably be your number 2 seed. I'm going to predict Gam because I do think they're slightly more talented, but Loud could get it, and hell, R7 could get it. I like R7. I think it's the best LLA team of all time, and so if they made some shocking upset wins, I wouldn't be, entirely surprised. I would just predict PSG and GAM to get out on that side. And then, like I said, BDS should dominate. And as for that 3rd seed, I don't think it's a particularly easy decision. I don't think any of these teams are good, but I think Wales and DFM are probably the 2 worst teams in the tournament, and so CFO would be my de facto number 2 seed. I think they will probably lose to whoever they face, in this case, PSG on the other side of the bracket, but I would expect BDS to for sure get out at number 1, and then one of those other 3 teams to get out at number 2. And then, like I said, PSG and probably GAM, but maybe Loud as the number 2 seed from the A side. But I'd love to know what you guys' thoughts are on the play-in stage down below. Who do you think is going to be getting out? And how do you think all of these teams are going to do in the main stage if they do end up making it there? Would love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions, of course, down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about Worlds every single day on this channel. We're going to be going over every single day of action. Play-in starts tomorrow as this video is going up, and so I'm incredibly excited to get it out. But if you want daily coverage of the World Championships and you enjoyed the video that you just watched, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so you can be notified when those videos do end up going live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.